Okay, so the point is fair. It's illustrated by this quote from Morty, Rick and Morty. I couldn't tell you what season. Haven't watched the show in a while. It's a good show. But they like to play with things like this. And Morty's like, "Will I do a Morty impression? I'll try."
Go for it.
That go
Uh,
on. That go
I
on.
feel like we should start our stories where they begin, not start them where they get interesting. That was terrible, but which is kind of a fair
There's at
criticism.
least 3 oh golly oh Jesus that you missed there, I'm sure.
Rick,
Yeah.
yeah, probably.
Yeah, but I mean, the point about that is that like it still leaves you stuck. You haven't got explained how you got there. Like you don't. Maybe people aren't motivated to pick up the hook and run with it.
Okay, well, that's every table is going to have people who are happy to sit back, but for the same reason that you've got people who jump into a conversation or jump into a mystery or locked room puzzle or whatever, there's going to be someone at your table who's probably going to take it and run with it, and you're allowed feed off them for the amount of time it takes you to kind of get everyone else, I suppose, clued in.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
But ultimately, a bit like Rick and Morty, right? There's a limit to how often you can do this.
Yes, I suppose almost by definition, it comes at the start,
Yeah.
and it has to be. I mean, you're sort of blindsiding players to some extent. So any foreknowledge of what the situation is really it means it kind of falls flat in its face. You're just doing a bit, but it's definitely suited to shorter sort of experiences,
Yeah.
like one shots or con scenarios where it shines, I think.
Absolutely.
Like, as I said previously about the Exalted game, it worked, but I felt it got, like, well, ultimately when I got to the transition point, it was a bit clunky. But I got there, and it was kind of fun, but, it generated... yeah, I mean, pluses and minuses. I mean, I like it, but I worry I like it because it's too gimmicky.
I like it because it's a gimmick. I think you're right. Don't use it every day. It's a sometimes food, essentially. But you can have a great deal of fun with it, I think. But we'll
Hold
see.
on. How did we get here again? You're listening to the Adventuring Party for the 4th week of August 2021. This week, no need for elaborate intro, let's get right into the action.
Welcome to the party. I'm Owen.
I'm Savage.
I'm Scarr.
And I'm Xaosseed.
And today, we are here to see if our stories should start in the middle of the action or not. I'm getting a bit of a sense of deja vu.
Don't know what you're talking about, mate.
All right.
I think the term you're looking for in the Latin is in media res. Or is that Latin? Yeah, Greek, Latin, who knows? One of the narrative cultures.
The dictionary knows.
The Greeks. The Romans. Anyone who speaks Italian.
Couldn't tell you. I picked it up from watching YouTube essays, so it's sus at best.
I mean, that is future education, so.
But that's how I've learned everything new in the last year or two, including the cure for the pandemic. But I'll reveal that secret later. An influencer told me, so it must be true. Anyways, yeah. So the topic today is in media res. It's a pretty well understood trope, a narrative gimmick. Would that be the way to describe it?
Oh, I think so, yeah.
Say technique.
The only thing that is carried over from the Greek and Roman civilizations that we hold today. But I kind of like it. I think it's a great way to start an adventure, to throw not only your characters but your players into the middle of a situation they don't have a firm handle on, and see what happens. What do you guys think?
Well, I immediately start breaking things down to categories and types and thinking about the extremes. I guess it's different depending on how often you're using it. Is it the fact that you're starting your campaign in media res, like, Critical Role did by accident? Or are we talking about your plot arcs? your adventure start media res, where it's just sort of like we skip all this whole downtime and traveling to the dungeon stuff and just start 3 rooms in after the pit trap goes off and the bugbears come out of the walls? Or are you literally starting like, have you got some kind of setup where you're like in some kind of old style serial where every session you end a cliffhanger and then every session you sort of start halfway through solving the cliffhanger? Or it's an interesting technique, but you have to figure out like how often is it a known gimmick of the campaign, something that your players are expecting, or is it meant to be a wham? You start straight in, get your feet wet, we'll flash back to the rest afterwards.
I think there's 2 reasons you do it. The first one is that the first session of your RPG is often a bit awkward to get going. That you want a kind of killer opening scene to get everyone revved up and like excited. Oh man, this is gonna be cool. You do your session 0 where you create your characters and you make sure that everyone knows the rules or whatever else, or whatever you're going to explain, blah blah blah. But then do you do the awkward? Okay, y'all meet in a dungeon or an Indian inn. Why don't go around the root table and introduce yourselves? And that's not. It's a bit low key, and you wanted a big splashy opening. You said, "Wait a minute, why don't I just start in the middle of a fight?" And you're in the middle of a fight. What do? Orc runs at you with an axe. What do? It's a great way for new players in some ways. You're basically going, bam, choice, immediately. You're hitting the crux of RPGs, which is a guy runs at you with an axe. What do? Which is one of the elemental game and one of the really empowering, like visceral bits of an RPG. Where all of a sudden it's not press X to dodge, it's what do?
Yeah, do something or die, and the something is entirely up to you.
And that's one way to do it. A second way is if you're trying to mess with a little bit of kind of do something cute from a kind of metagame or storytelling point of view, where you're like, we're starting in the middle here and then we're going to work backwards and see if we can get everything to line up. And we should be able to get everything to line up because everyone will probably cooperate to do it, which is what I found often when I do something like that. I did it once. So yeah, that's the 2 reasons, I think. Xaosseed, what are your thoughts?
I would definitely throw in a third one, which is the great thing about, instead of going round the table and then the wizard sits down sort of and tells them a mission, it's like start things with the fight or any crisis, and by the time that has finished, they have reason to trust each other. They have reason to work together because they've done something together and like these others had their back. Or didn't, which is very telling. But there's it gets you, it immediately bunny hops you over that, like, who are these people and why should I care about any of them?
Now that I think of it, actually, it's employed a little more often than I perhaps suspected it was. Out of the Abyss, effectively, the 5th Ed campaign book from Wizards of the Coast, who sometimes release material, effectively starts kind of in media res. It's the version where you all wake up in a cell, media res, so there's not an immediate call to action, but it does put you in the middle of a situation where you're not really sure of the particulars proceeding, at least as it's written. When I think about a media res, I definitely think of the orc axe dilemma first. It's the one that really gets me pumped for it as a way of starting not a campaign, maybe a campaign.
Maybe you could start your Are the Abyss with the Overseers coming with you with their whip ready. What do? And that's a good way to explain that you're in shades.
Would the panel consider the opening to Skyrim to be in media res?
Absolutely, yeah.
To an extent, yeah.
You're sat in a cart to some extent.
And I think that's an amazing opening.
Well, it's a meme for a reason.
Yes and no, because you're not called to action, and you have a fairly lengthy. I just watched it recently because I watch video games now. Believe me, it's that kind of year. You start with some fairly lengthy exposition. You wake up in a wagon full of people you don't know, and you're all bound. One guy's gagged, I believe, and you're given a spiel about what the political situation is and who that guy is and why they're being executed and all the rest. In the middle of that, you're invited to indulge in some character creation, which is riffed on by certain voice lines. Now, by the time you get to your head is on the chopping block, things certainly kick off, but that's more of a dragon kicks in the door start, a classic Raymond Chandler. I don't know if I'd actually consider it in media res because, like I said, it starts with a great deal of inaction. Ideally, in media res is, I mean, a great start for a single character would be you've just gone through a window and you have 4 stories up. What do you do? It's harder with a group,
Yeah.
and I think there's actually a whole bunch of things you need to consider. So we've talked about it. Hold on. Look, first of all, no, let me go back. Let's say, for example, I'd instead said, yes, Skyrim's a great example of immediate res. What would you then say, Owen?
I was actually going to ask because I think it does take a bit of the time to get going there. It's an interesting compromise between you start off immediately in the world and you're seeing stuff and things are happening around you. You're getting hints about world building, and then they transition over to now build your character. My favorite version of the Skyrim one actually is when someone mods in Thomas the Tank Engine as the dragons, because that's genuinely hilarious. It's one where I look at it and kind of go, okay, this isn't really, but it is kind of. It's sort of a halfway house between it, in that you're definitely coming in the middle, but it's not going full throttle immediately. We're at 100. We're going at 100 miles an hour. Press X to not die. Here's your, because you can't in a game. You've got to teach people how to play the game. So it's not going full, bam, immediately. RPGs can do that because the GM can hold a hand mechanically. The GM can go, grand, you're going to attack him? Cool. Let me teach you how you make an attack. Pick up those dice. Grand. You've got dice pool of 6 dice. You're rolling 3d8s and 3d6s. You're going to roll that and you're going to tell me how many of them get over 5. Those are your successes. And that's where you can start. You can be immediately, what do you do? Cool. Now I'll show you how to do it. And that's a good teaching tool in an RPG because you get straight to it. There's a risk of overloading people, doing it a bit too fast. There's a reason a lot of RPGs will go, first show people how to make a skill test, then show people how to make an attack roll, then show people how to take damage. So you often do it like that. Whereas if you're going to give them the full choice, you might have to teach them any part of the game. And like, okay, attack roll is like a skill test, but I haven't told you how to do a skill test, but it's basically the same. Pick those up.
True. Now it does make teaching any given system a little more complicated if we've decided, hell, I'll spring this narrative trope or this gimmick on new players. so we're really overloading the bench. But I would say that if you are dealing with new players and you decide to employ media res, it is teaching them perhaps a much more valuable holistic lesson about being empowered to do anything before you've learned what the rules are. You're not thinking in terms of what dice can I roll. You're thinking in terms of what can I do here, and the purest form of role playing. Like options are nearly limitless within the understood sort of parameters of whatever universe I'm standing in. What can I do? Can I swing a chair? Can I run away? Can I disappear? That starts you in a mode where you're kind of considering all options and asking your GM, well, is this a thing we can explore, rather than looking to your character sheet for an answer because you're kind of locked in on a system already, or you're focused on, oh well, I'll get 2 attacks before he reaches me. So it's kind of crack. Anyone used in media res in the real?
Yeah, I had an Exalted game. I've used it in small ways. The biggest one I did was an Exalted game where I effectively, my opening scene was from session 25, effectively, if you looked at it from a pure progression point of view, where they start in a fight in the middle of the city, and all of these NPCs are running at them and shouting things and saying stuff. And then we flash back to effectively 25 sessions earlier, with them starting to go into basically them being brought together and go to a temple for the first time. And they know 25 sessions down the road what's going to be happening. And I slowly folded all those kind of NPCs in on the way we went. They kind of got to know them a little bit. And some of them remembered them from the starting scene, some of them didn't, but that's fine. And yeah, it was interesting. Kind of worked. I thought after I did it, I said, that was fun. The players got a kick out of it. It was a bit gimmicky, but that's okay. I mean, ultimately, I think it was decent. Though I kind of felt, I was like, okay, well, this was good, but was I being cute for the sake of being cute? You know?
A question on that, like, there's the immediate, this bit, like starting in the middle, when you, as you did that, and then like backfilling the story, like that gave people a grip on what had got them to the point where, the curtain goes up, the story's in motion, they see what's happening, they go forward. Versus, I think where most people would use it, or where you hear it mentioned a lot, is they don't get that go back. They don't really do a lot of the flashbacks. There's the kind of, the curtain goes up and it's forward from here, which is the thing that I find interesting and tricky. Like the goal that you want is people move forward on this implied shared story behind them and take it on board and adopt it and say, yeah, that's cool. We go forward following the logic of the story that got us to this in media res. Curtain goes up, off we go. Where the danger is, though, on the other hand, the curtain goes up, there's this implied shared story behind them, and then they go, actually, I don't get it. That makes no sense. I don't want to.
My character wouldn't do that.
Exactly. So to me, the big challenge is kind of welding together this shared view on, like, how did we get here? We buy it. We go forward. So, like, any thoughts from folks on how you'd pull that off? Is it flashbacks? Is that the only way?
Like I did it as the way I did it, and it worked okay. I was like, this is gonna work. I said that'll probably work. And the thing is, most players, if you're transparent about what you're trying to do, will actually play along. They'll be like, oh, that's kind of a cool idea. This, and you make it fairly clear this is what was going to happen, guys. You explain, okay, we're going to flashback now to a bunch earlier, 6 months earlier. And and most players will be like, oh yeah, this is a bit different. Why not have a crack? You might have someone who's a negative Nelly about it, or just doesn't like the idea. That's fine. If you have one of those in your group, and it may not work as a result. But most players will be willing to give something like that a go. So, not unhappy about it. There's classic Call of Cthulhu campaign, Masks of Nyarlathotep, has a very good straight into the action opener. You get a telegram from an old friend saying, please come meet me. I have something urgent to discuss with you. You get to the hotel room. He's dead. And one of the things that got made was he mentions in his telegram that we knew each other from this thing we did together in Argentina. And one of the common bits of homebrew content that got put out and used extensively was that adventure. So you could fold it into your campaign or run that adventure first. So, hey, at least you know this person, you're a bit more invested in them. And when they re-released the new edition of it, they actually wrote up that as an adventure and went, here, run this adventure about what you got up to in Argentina. And then you'll know the guy, at least, so when they kill him, hey, there's a little bit more attachment. And that ended up working better for most people than the in media res start. So
yeah,
that's the sort of the thing is when you're thinking of deploying an in media res, you're basically saying the setup is not the juice here. The juice is the action. The juice is the orc running at you with an axe. And you have to be aware of, is my group the kind that wants to make those decisions, jump in, feet first, we'll figure it out, backstory later. I can come up with 1,000 reasons why we're friends, how we met at a bar, how we killed those orcs, etc. But there's also the question of, well, the setup. Is the setup important? For some people it is. And honestly, I think if you're doing an in media res once, at the very start of your campaign, I actually think it might be harder to do it that way than to set up, say, a pulp style campaign where you start every session in media res, having jumped, from where the last session ended to the next cool action point. If you're doing it more often, then presumably your players are in that mode of, well, we'll just skip over the setup. We can assume we got across the canyon and save the reporter, etc., and we just get to the next trap or ambush or whatever. But, some people want to start a campaign by putting their chips on the table, not playing with the GM's chips, as it were.
Like on that, the thing you referenced of we start at the dungeon entrance, that's super classic for the way that it used to be. It's like you start as you're about to venture underground, and I think, if I recall, is like it'd be at the end of the session. It's implied you're out of the dungeon. A couple of rolls is like you go back to town, you spend the loot, you buy whatever you need. Curtain up, next session, back at the dungeon.
Yeah, who cares what happens in between?
Yeah, but some people do. Some people, maybe they have...
Yeah, absolutely. And that effectively gave us the kind of role playing we have now, which is, well, what happens outside the dungeon? Lots, as it turns out.
My point is not that this is a invalid technique or anything. It's for the right group, it's going to be perfect. For the right campaign, it's going to be perfect. But you can't just use it as it's not WD-40. It is a sometimes tool. It is specifically for a campaign where skipping the setup will keep the pacing up at the right level. For a fast-paced campaign where the cutting room floor is your friend and skittering along to the next plot point or revelation or fight or call to adventure is going to keep you at the right energy level for the campaign you're trying to run.
I would suggest on this one that, yeah, it's the maintaining energy level. That's a good point, and it's effectively, do you need to wind up the spring of your party's motivations, or can you raise the curtain and they're motivated? Like an example would be, say you're running a Starfleet campaign and the curtain goes up when you beam down onto the surface, you're on a mission. You'll get your briefing radioed down, or you're a bunch of shadowrunners and effectively you're in your minivan driving to the site, and Mr. Johnson comes on the phone. He says, "All right, chummers, here's the brief." Like, you don't need to know too much more beyond that, beyond like you sort of, here's the thing that's coming in. You know, you understand your motivation. You're a Starfleet officer here to save the day. You're a shadowrunner about to hit the job. Fantasy, it could be like, you know, you're about to raid the dungeon, Golden Glory. The in media res start, like getting straight into the meat of it, works when you don't have to really think about, why am I here? Why am I even doing all of this? It's a question of like, there's a big conspiracy to topple the kingdom. And you're like, do I care? Do I like the king? You know, is he a good king? Is he a bad king? You know, who are the people who are trying to knock him over? You know, where you need a bit more context on whether you should stick your oar in, that's when you need what's my motivation?
That's perfect place for me to jump in with a couple of thoughts. So, fiddlesticks, what were they? What's my motivation? Yes. We have to remember, of course, that in media res is borrowed from more concrete narrative arts. And by concrete, I mean there's one person in charge, there's a worked out plot that has been sort of regarded back and forward. Motivations are sort of cast to suit whatever the author requires of the story. Here, we're dealing with, media res as a sort of a proposal from the GM, and then having to figure out how to fold in the responses from the players, who might look at the situation very differently and act accordingly. Further complicated, of course, by the fact that sometimes media res is used as a time jumping device, much like session 25 in Exalted, and then you're jumping back in time. And now, obviously, you've got to run up to that moment and figure out how to get all the pieces in place with all the interactions from your players along the way, one of whom maybe is deciding to play stick in the mud and perhaps has eyeballed some of the pivot points and decided, right, I'll actually do things that'll make sure that this can't happen. So exploring, keeping motivations in mind, figuring out how to get everybody on board is crucial. Or it's something you don't care about that much. Like, at the end of the day, I think it's a bit like the Roman and Greek civilizations. It's a bit of a gimmick that will, you use once or twice and then forget about.
Rome lasted 2,000 years. Anyway.
Yeah, I see. It's the kind of, in media res is often followed up by a turn to the audience to go, well, you're probably wondering how I got here. And of course, that question for the players is either alive or dead. Like, as you say, they don't care and they're going forward from this point, or they care very much and you'd better have a very good answer, and you're going to figure out how to get them to kind of buy into that answer or explore it together.
Like, one other thought on that I was looking at when we were talking about it is, so one of the issues I had in my campaigns was people start off at a point and you're like, okay, they're going to do some intro stuff and then we're going to get to like the big stuff, you know, then they're going to be like a classic example would be, I want to run a Planescape campaign, so I'm going to have a cycle of, they're going to do a bunch of adventures in their as standard fantasy adventuring, and then they're going to find a portal, and then they're going to go off onto the plains, and I'm going to run my big Planescape campaign. If you set off that way, you have the risk of you're going to spend a lot of time not really doing what you wanted to do before you can get to the stuff that you wanted to do. Which, like, in starting with in Media Res, is like the portal flashes into life, the party looks around, and they step through. Or, better yet, like the portal flashes into life as the wizard casts it, as arrows from the other dungeon denizens fly past them. It's like, quick, we gotta go. Everybody dashes through the portal. That's the start of your Planescape campaign. It's a way to like get straight to the good stuff that you wanted to do in this campaign without having to burn precious gaming time on setup that's like, is only kind of like just to get you to this point.
Oh, actually, here's a bit of internet and timing magic, because we're doing this in one of our more public channels on the Discord. Join us on Discord. You find us at the Adventuring Party. But Evil Robot Shane, show founder and sometimes host, he's dropped this comment on In Media Res, and I quote, "Apparently the West End Games Star Wars Adventure modules used to do this all the time. A friend of mine talked about how in their campaign it'd be all tea and metals. Then at the start of the next session, everybody's suddenly on a conveyor belt in a lava factory fighting laser
Pterodactyls.
Pterodactyls. Silent P on that one, Mick. So yeah, it's like it's often, there's probably plenty of other examples we've missed in published works. So Xaosseed, to your point, I don't have a point actually. I think I proposed this, but I'm kind of going off it. It's definitely one to employ on the sometimes.
What I think about it is, it's a narrative technique. It comes from film and TV and plays. And as a result, yeah, it can work in an RPG. But it can also be a bit of a damn squib. And one of the problems is, when you launch, an orc runs at you with an axe, what do? There are two kinds of player in that situation. There is one who goes, I'll do this. Cool. And there's a second one who gets completely paralyzed by the question. Analysis paralysis locks in and they don't know what to do. They're like,
I could do anything? Oh no.
And then as a GM, you have two options. You can go, well then nothing happens and he hits you. If you don't know, if you're basically going to go, life's hard, kid, get a helmet, you're setting the tone of your game by doing that. And you can say, life's hard, get a helmet. You got to think, you got to react, maybe next time you better. And someone will either go, yeah, you're right, next time I better have a good answer. And another player will tune out totally.
Yeah, you sucker punched me from the off. To hell with this.
Yeah. So it depends. I think it works well in the right situation. I think what I did with the Exalted was way too gimmicky, and it was cool, but I would never do it again. But I would sometimes use, you start in the middle of the fight, what happens? As a good way to just, I want to kick this off with a bang, let's do this. Rather than a slow ramp up and us getting to know our characters and everything. No, we're just going to go straight into this. We're going to go full throttle. That'll keep those fighters off our tail.
Oh, Warlord, you've run many a campaign at this point. Any? Have you ever been tempted to use a media res or something like it?
It is actually, I think I'm possibly the opposite of Saboteur. It's like, I've never used it, but I can imagine myself setting up the right campaign to use it. I tend to be a very choice first. I'm somewhat guilty of overloading my players with information because I want them to make informed choices, which is one of those things which is often axiomatically treated as a good thing, but can actually annoy some players who's just like, can we please not? I would like to make an uninformed decision now, please. But yeah, I think about like a really pulp Conan game. Maybe pull out some of those OSR stuff that I apparently hate, but somehow spend so much money on anyway. And just go, alright, you end his last session covered in gold that you've stolen from the Snake Queen. This session, you are penniless hobo, and there are rat men charging out of the sewers to get you. I have provided this random chart of dumb reasons why you lost all your gold. Let's roll initiative.
It's called a carousing table.
Yeah, exactly. How did you carouse? Oh, you chose to carouse poorly. Funny how that works. Alcohol is a wonderful thing. But yeah, that's a very campaign-specific setup. That is, I want... we as a group want a big, fast-flowing, jump from adventure to adventure, chaotic thing. We don't want to be XP for gold or build up your organization. We want to go, you are now in the frozen north, you have been friends with these Vikings for months, and now the frost giants are coming. It is, again, it's a very particular thing, but I could see myself developing that as I grow as a GM. It's just like, informed choices are great and all, but not every campaign's a sandbox. Some campaigns are, I have this module, I would like to run it, let's start in the module. In room 3, after you're already covered in oil and the torch-bearing zombies are approaching.
On sort of just running stuff, as you're saying that sounds like the Adventurers League. It's like you sit down to table with whoever else is around. It's a bunch of folk. The DM's like, okay, today we're running, what module do I have? Oh, we're running Wolves of Elperton, something like that. And you have to have a lot of kind of, I think as Owen was saying, is like people just are going to go along with it. It's like, okay, this is my party, I guess. They're my adventuring buddies. Okay, cool. Oh, look, there's the hook. We head towards the hook. Because in this context, like, we're not looking for a deep kind of, why are we all here? It's like, we're adventurers. There's the adventure. Let's go. Next 4 hours, we're doing Adventurers League.
And, or similar for conventions. Conventions are a very good place to deploy these kinds of narrative techniques. If we all have tales of, epic, super plotted out convention scenarios that took us an hour and a half to out of the 3 hour slot to just introduce our characters because GM wasn't in the right mode, or we decided we needed to give ourselves elaborate backstories, or so in any timed context where you want to hit the ground running, that becomes a much more powerful technique.
I had to look up what axiomatic meant.
Does extra damage to...
yeah, like short, sharp bursts, and especially when the level of engagement is, I'm here for a session, then in media res, I think is a fantastic way to just get all that energy gathered up immediately and get it on the table and get everyone shouting and rolling dice. This device of starting in the middle is actually something players have been on board with in a kind of a crypto way for almost since the beginning of tabletop role playing. As arriving at the dungeon is kind of like in media res. Like, how did we get here? How did we make the momentous decisions to risk our lives with a bunch of relative strangers in a labyrinth of death? Doesn't kind of really matter. Let's get in there and see what happens. So we should probably embrace the presence of it in gaming in general, and also recognize that if you're pushing it, it's a bit of a gimmick. So be careful. While it might sort of exist in the ether of gaming, when you draw it out and try and coalesce it into a, look guys, look at the smart thing I'm doing, you might run into problems there. So be aware of the pitfalls. So I feel like we've probably run this one out as a gimmick as far as we can. Obviously, we're never going to resolve the mismatch between the start of this episode and the rest of it. Would anyone like to do the needful?
If you'd like to start in the middle of telling us how we're wrong, you can hit us up on our social media.
But for now, this party's over.
Thanks for listening to The Adventure Party. You can find show notes and links to things we've mentioned at www.theadventuringparty.net and on our Facebook page. You can leave comments there, or talk to our Twitter account at AdventurePTY, or you can record a voice message at www.speakpipe.com/theadventuringparty. We can also be contacted directly by email at party@theadventuringparty.net. If you'd like to be in touch with the party all the time, come join our Discord server, link in the show notes. The Adventuring Party is released under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share Alike version 3 license.